to the K through 12 Revolution. I'm Gary Marvin Davison. Really want to thank Dwayne Smith behind the camera today. As I understand it, he's on the board at MTN. We want to thank him for his presence. Holly Hollister takes the material that she usually records and edits it and just does a really good job putting everything together. She's effectively my director, and I want to thank Kevin Jenkins for producing this show. My great thanks to all of them. I want to introduce you folks today to one of my students, Zarek Regaldo Saldivar, who has been in my program since he was in 2nd grade. He was just a little guy, all smiles, coming out and eager to go. And so he has been in the program now. This would be his 7th year. He is a grade 8 student at Anderson School over on the south side. So thank him for his many years of participation in the program. Now, when that happens and a person arrives in the 8th grade, earlier and earlier in some cases. I have a student as early as the 5th grade who is very adeptly reading Shakespeare. The students are capable of all kinds of advanced demonstrations of their talents and skills. So what you're going to see us doing today is just look in on one of our sessions, typically, that we have. And we're going to be reading Macbeth. We're a ways into it at this point. For those of you who know the story, the most dastardly deed has already been done. I'm going to ask Zarek to summarize as best he can what's happened so far, and I will chime in, and then we will actually pick it up, and you will see how this young man can read so adeptly beautiful language, challenging language of Shakespeare. What's the story so far, Zarek?
So far, the real story is Macbeth was a general, or is a general, and he has been given a new spot as I think it's also like a small kingdom, right? That
he was given a territory, additional territory. He was already Thane of Glamis, and now he is Thane of Cawdor. He was given an extra territory. Now, you bring that up, and that's a good way to say it. And by the way, you have a tendency to speak kind of quickly, so if you would kind of slow down just a little bit, and
I'll do it again.
I know you will. So yes, so he was given additional territory by King Duncan. Why was that?
I believe it's because of one of his heroic acts, I think it was one of the war.
That's true, and that territory though was taken from the former Thane of Cawdor. Do you remember why?
I think because he was a traitor.
He was a traitor. He went over to the Norwegian side and to the rebels within Scotland. So that territory was taken from him, and he was also executed, right? That is to say, the former Thane of Cawdor. So Macbeth was given additional territory. Now, in the meantime, he and a friend by the name of Banquo had met up with 3 very interesting characters. Who were they?
They're the 3 witches.
Right. And what did they predict?
They predicted that Macbeth would become the next king. They said that, I don't remember if they exactly said that he had to execute the king.
No, they didn't say that. We'll get to that part, but they did predict that he would be king, and they also predicted that his friend would have some good things happening within his family. His friend and fellow general is Banquo. What did the witches promise Banquo? Do you remember?
Well, that his son, his children, would become the next bloodline of the king.
Right. Right. In fact, that there would most likely be a string of kings within Banquo's, male, the family, in his family and his male heirs. Okay, so very good. So part of that prediction came through, right? Macbeth was given the territory known as Cawdor. Now, there does seem to be a little problem, though, and he gets word from Duncan, the king, while he's being honored, that in fact, the next in line, his eldest son, Malcolm, is going to be king. Now, of course, Macbeth says, well, oh, wait, the witches predicted I would be king, and when is this going to happen exactly? And he's kind of anxious for that to happen. So what does Lady Macbeth urge him to?
She urges him to commit a bad deed, to kill the King Duncan.
Right.
And I don't think they said anything about if they were going to kill the kids, the next guys in line.
No, they never really addressed that question, interestingly enough, as they're contemplating killing Duncan the king, but they do say that, you know, we need to set up this plan where we get King Duncan out of the way, because if that doesn't happen, Macbeth's not going to be on the throne. Duncan will still be there. How do they decide to do that? And in fact, at the point that we've gotten in the play, it's already been done. What happens?
Excuse me. What happens is Macbeth, Lady Macbeth, she says that they should drunk the guards that would protect the Duncan.
Get them drunk.
And then it's called they would murder the king and then like set them up as if the drunk guards were the ones who murdered.
Right, and by setting them up, what are they going to place in
They're going to place, it's called the bloody knife.
Right.
And or the dagger.
Dagger, yes.
And they're going to place blood all over them and their faces.
Right. Very good. Now, Macbeth does the deed. He goes in, and remember, Macbeth kind of goes back and forth as to whether this is a good idea. He has towering ambition, and he doesn't seem to have any real moral problem with killing the king, but he knows it's a terrible deed, and so he's got some mixed feelings about this. He gets in and does it, but then he comes back, and he's pretty shaken. He's pretty upset about what's happened, and his hands are bloody. But Macbeth notices that he's carrying something that he should have left behind. What was that?
The daggers.
The daggers. What was he supposed to do with those daggers?
He was to place them on the guards.
Right. And so she says, well, you better go back. And he says, oh, no, I'm not going back there. He's done with that. So Lady Macbeth says, oh, man, you know, you coward.
Yeah.
Basically, I'll do it. So she goes and puts the bloody knives back into the hands of the guard. So they have, at this point, done the deed. It's come off a little bit herky-jerky, but they got it done, and now we're going to see what happens next. Okay? So that's where we are. Folks, that was quite a good job by Zarek, as he usually does, and we're glad to have you caught up on what really is an exciting plot. You know, let me say this. One of my points in the K-12 revolution here is that we don't challenge our students anywhere close to what we should challenge them with in reading material. I have found over an over 40-year teaching career that I have never had a student who could not engage with the plot of Shakespeare. I mean, you know, all kinds of things happen that are common to humanity: ambition, distrust, infidelity, all kinds of things, you know, as well as towering noble deeds and heroic action. And students relate to this. Last year, Zarek, in a kind of gender role identity, played Orpheus in our play that I put together, compressed language, a 30-minute version, but all original Shakespearean literature. He played the part of, that's usually given to Ophelia, who is the love interest of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Well, Hamlet, Princess of Denmark, was my really wonderful student, Angelique Brown-Skinner, operating at the top of the program, and I wanted to reserve that role to her, and Zarek stepped in only the 7th grade and did a wonderful job with this character who kind of comes emotionally unglued because of the various experiences that she in the original play, but he in this play performed. So it's quite remarkable, and I find time after time after time, I ask students if they want to do it, and most of the time they say yes in one manner or another. Zarek really did not seem to be very hesitant. He approached it carefully and a little nervously, but when he brought it off and he really had to do some heavy-duty things, he did a wonderful, wonderful job. So we should be challenging our students at a young age to engage with really high-quality literature, to advance math, respect their ability to learn science and history and economics, even at the K-5 level. And as you know, I've talked about this, and here you have an example of someone who has risen to really some, what would typically be considered amazing challenges. So, We are going to pick it up in what is scene 3. So, Lady Macbeth and Macbeth have brought off this terrible deed, and we now are introduced to a scene where there is a porter, a person who's going to answer the door of the palace, and there is a knocking. And he's going to be talking about some kind of interesting things. He actually is imagining in his own mind, I think probably to keep himself from being bored about just having the task of opening doors, he's imagining that he is a porter at the gates of hell. And so the things that he is going to be saying relate to that. Zarek, this first part's come along. I think I am mostly going to read this, and you just listen along carefully, and I'll be kind of explaining it, and you tell me if you understand, and let's make sure that we're understanding what's happening here. So the porter says, "Here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should have old turning the key," which means that there are a lot of folks who might be coming to hell that he would have to open the door for. Knocking within, knock, 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 he's irritated. "Who's there in the name of Beelzebub? Here's a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty." So he's pretending there's a farmer coming up who thought he was going to have a good harvest. He didn't have such a good harvest, so he hung himself regrettably. "Come in time, have napkins enough about you. Here, you'll sweat for it." Knocking within, knock, knock. "Who's there in the other devil's name? Faith, here's an equivocator meaning somebody who kind of takes one position and then another, doesn't know exactly what to do, that can swear in both the scales against either scale. Who committed treason enough, for God's sake, yet could not equivocate to heaven." So had perpetrated some deed that we're not sure of, was kind of on one side and then the other, went through with it, supposedly for God's sake, but somehow it did not rise to the level to get him in heaven. Knocking within, knock, knock, knock. "Who's there? Faith, here's an English tailor." You know what a tailor is, Jerry?
I think it's someone who makes clothing.
Very good. One of the things I found about Zarek is that he really, he reads a fair amount, and he's read a lot with me, and he picks up things on his environment. So words that I will ask him that I'm not always sure a student knows, he often knows, but then we learn quite a few along the way as well. So that's right. So he says, "Here's an English tailor, come hither, for stealing out of a French hose, stole some material from a French, well, that is French of origin anyway. Come in, tailor. You may roast your goose. You can roast in here for sure. You can get mighty hot in hell. Knocking within, knock, knock, never at quiet. What are you? But this place is too cold for hell. I'll devil porter it no further." I'm not going to be the porter of hell any further, he says. "I had thought to have let in some of all professions that go the primrose way to the everlasting bonfire." Knocking within, anon, anon. Do you remember what anon means in Shakespeare?
I remember reading that.
What would he be saying if he's saying anon, anon, and he's the porter, and someone's knocking, and he's about to order to open the door? What might a person say? About to open the door, knock, 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 and the guy is, well, maybe who's there? Might also say, I'm coming, and that's kind of what he's saying here. He's, non really means soon. So, son, I'm coming. Okay, so anon, anon, I pray you, remember the porter, and he opens the gate. All right, now, we can trade off some parts here. I'll continue to do the porter bit. It's, writing is a person by the name of Macduff, who eventually has a big part to play, those of you who know the basic story. And he is a nobleman, an aristocrat, person that has a high position in land himself, like Macbeth does. So why don't you do that part, since I have already started the porter's part? Macduff comes in and says,
Was it too late, friend, or you went to bed, that you lie so late?
yeah, so when he says, ere you went to bed, what does that mean?
Did you?
Before you. Remember, ear means before, right? Mm-hmm. So before you went to bed, so late, friend, before you're getting to bed, would that you do lie so late? And the porter says, Faith, sir, we were carousing to the second cock. So in other words, to the second rooster crowed. They were staying up, and we're going to find out they were drinking late in the evening, or late into the morning. And drink, sir, is a great provoker. It causes three things. Now this is kind of humorous, and he's going to say three things that drinking too much liquor does to a person. Macduff says.
What three things does drink especially provoke?
Right, so in other words, what are those three things? And now the porter, hang in here with this, Zarek, and I'll explain it as I go along, see what you understand. Mary, sir, Mary means, hey, pay attention to this. Look, sir, Mary, sir, nose painting. Now, so this is people who have drunk too much liquor, right? What do you think he means by nose painting, especially if the nose were painted red? When someone gets drunk,
Nosebleed? Oh, the nose are red?
nose sometimes gets red, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one thing. Sleep, meaning it can make you drowsy, right? And urine. So you know what urine is, right? So it makes you pee. Lechery, sir, it provokes and unprovokes. It provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. We may have to make some of this G-rated. Therefore, much drink may be said to be an equivocator with lechery. It makes him and it mars him. So it makes him feel bold, but it actually wears him down, right? It's not what you would wish it to be at the time, right? It's a great statement against alcohol, which I hate, by the way. It persuades him, it disheartens him, makes him stand to and not stand to. In conclusion, equivocates him into a sleep, and giving him the lie leaves him. So essentially, you can't do those things that you really would prefer to do when you're under the influence of alcohol. Okay, Macduff says.
I believe drink gave the lie last night.
Right. So I think the drink wore you down last night from the looks of you, right? And the porter says, that it did, sir, in the very throat of me. But I requited him. See if you do know what he says here. But I requited him for his lie. I paid him back. Him, meaning the drunken state. And I think being too strong for him, though he took up my leg sometime, yet I made a shift to cast him. So what did he do?
Kill him?
No, after he drunk too much, what do people do sometimes?
Oh, through.
Threw up. Cast him. So there's that exchange, just the exchange at the door. We might also get a little insight that probably the fact that he was kind of had a hangover and was still maybe a little under the influence, why he was also imagining all that stuff about being the porter at the gates of hell, right? Okay, and then Macduff says,
Is thy master stirring?
Stirring, and this could mean a couple of things. It could be, well, let's see, yeah, thy master, speaking to the porter. Now, this is Macbeth's castle. But as it turns out, he is talking at first about Macbeth, but then later on he's going to be asking, is the king stirring? So he asks a couple of questions about, first of all, whether Macbeth is up and about, and then later whether the king is up and about. So, now this is another character who does, well, as he goes on, has a few parts. Lennox is another noble person who owns land. They call those people, I'm going to go to the board here in just a moment. One of the terms that comes up is thane, T-H-A-N-E, and that means basically aristocrat, noble, a wealthy landowner who has been given territory. Essentially, you know, those things were called fiefs. So he's a thane, a fief holder, land given to him by the king, and carries the status of an aristocrat, a noble, a highly placed person with landed wealth. Okay, so Lennox is one of those characters. Lennox says, good morrow, noble sir. Now let's see, I'll do Macbeth. No, you go ahead and do Macbeth because I've been doing Macduff. So Macbeth says, good morrow.
Good morrow, both.
Is the king stirring, worthy thing?
Not yet.
He did command me to call timely on him. I have almost slipped the time, slipped the hour. What is he saying there? Was he right on time?
No.
No, very good. No, he's running a little late. And Macbeth says,
I'll bring you to him.
and Macduff says, I know this is a joyful trouble to you, but yet 'tis one.
The labor was delight in physics pain. This is the door.
Now, physics is used in an unusual way for us there. See if you can tell what it means when I reread this with a certain intonation. The labor, meaning the effort that we put into some things. We delight in physics pain. So the work that we enjoy, physics pain, what do you think physics might mean in this case? Does it make pain worse, or does it help if it's work that we delight?
I think it makes the pain
Better, because you're liking what you're doing, right? Yeah. So when Dwayne, Mr. Smith, is playing that bass guitar, even maybe if he's got a little cold, he feels better because he's playing the guitar, right? Or if I'm teaching or doing what I do, I feel a little better even if I show up feeling not as good as I'd like to. So Macbeth then, let's see, where are we here? Macbeth says, not yet. And Macduff says, let's see. He did command me to call time on him. I almost slipped the hours, what you said. And Macbeth says, I'll bring you to him. And Macduff says, I know this is a joyful trouble to you, but yet 'tis one. And now as Macbeth, you say, oh, you've already said the physics. This is the door. Macduff says, I'll make so bold to call, for 'tis my limited service. And he exits, and Lennox says, goes the king hence today? Is the king going out today? And then what does Macbeth say?
He does. He did appoint so.
And Lennox says, the night has been unruly. See if you can figure out what's going on here, Zarek, and I'll explain some things as I go along. It's an interesting thing that often comes up in Shakespeare. When something terrible has happened or is about to happen, a lot of times in Shakespeare, the elements, the weather, and just the general scene will be kind of nasty and signs of terrible things happening. So see if you can catch what's going on here. Our chimneys were blown down, and as they say, lamentings, meaning yells of grief, heard in the air. Strange screams of death, oh! And prophesying with accents terrible of dire combustion, fires, and confused events. New hatch to the woeful, the grief-laden time, lots of sadness. The obscure bird clamored the livelong night. So in other words, a bird was letting out with its terrible scream the whole night long too. Some say the earth was feverish and did shake. If the earth is feverish and does shake, what would we call that?
Earthquake.
An earthquake. So it even felt like there was an earthquake. So you get the point. There's signs, maybe from the heavens, that nasty things are afoot because nature is reacting this way. Macbeth says,
Twas a rough night.
my son Ryan Davison Reed and I have always thought that was kind of a funny line because this guy goes on and on and on about what a tough night it was. And Macbeth simply replies,
Twas a rough.
"'Twas a rough night." And Lennox says, my young remembrance cannot parallel a fellow to it. So in other words, I can't remember anything like this that's happened before. Macbeth re-enters, and Macduff says to him, oh, actually, Macduff re-enters. So Macduff has gone into the castle. Now, Zarek, you see what you think he's observed. Oh, horror, horror, horror. Tongue nor heart can conceive nor name thee. What do you think he's discovered?
The body of the king.
That's right. He's discovered the king has been murdered.
Dun, dun, dun.
And Macbeth and Lennox both simultaneously say, what's the matter? And Macduff then reports, oh, let's see, actually, so confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple. Now keep in mind, in those days, there was often kind of an idea that the king had got his position because somehow God had graced him for that position. That was called divine right. You know. And so he's saying, oh, wow, we have lost the one that the Lord has given us to rule, and stole thence the life of the building, the very energy of the building, because when the king's in a building, that makes it more important, right? So Macbeth then says,
What isn't you say the life?
yeah, mean you, his majesty, Lennox says, and then Macduff reports, approach the chamber meaning basically the bedroom, the room where the king was, and destroy your sight with a new Gorgon, a terrible beast, mythological beast. Do not bid me speak, see, and then speak yourselves. Exeunt, which means both of them exit, Macbeth and Lennox, and Macduff continues, awake, awake, ring the alarm bell, murder and treason, Banquo and Donalbain. Now Banquo is Macbeth's good friend, Donalbain is one of his sons, and they must be close by. Malcolm, also, that's the eldest son.
Yeah, the next in line.
Next in line, very good, awake, shake off this downy sleep, death's counterfeit. That's an interesting way to think of sleep. It's kind of like rehearsal for death, counterfeit. Not really death, but kind of faking like death, right? And look on death itself, up, up, and see the great doom's image. Malcolm, Banquo, as from your graves rise up and walk like sprites, which always means spirits, to countenance, which means to come face to face with this horror. Ring the bell, ding-a-ling-ling, the bell rings. Enter Lady Macbeth, and she says, let me ask you to read Lady Macbeth's part here tonight because I'm Macduff. She says,
Was the business that such hideous trumps caused to barely the sleepless of the house?
Yeah.
Speak.
yeah, the sleepers of the house, what's going on here? Waking up everybody, and he says, oh, gentle lady. This is very interesting when we keep in mind that Lady Macbeth,
She did part of the work.
yeah, I mean, did part of the work in a way, took the daggers back, and certainly helped come up with the plan. Well, he says to her in kind of a patronizing way, oh, gentle lady, 'tis not for you to hear what I can speak. The repetition in a woman's ear would murder as it fell. So she can't take it, right, and yet she's
done it.
done it. Enter Banquo, and Macduff continues, oh, Banquo, Banquo, our royal masters, murdered.
Who Alice? What in your house?
Yeah, what in our house? Woe, which means, oh, misery to us. Alas, oh no. What in our house? And Banquo says, oh, too cruel. Anywhere. Dear Duff, I prithee contradict thyself and say, it is not so. Re-enter Macbeth and Lennox with Ross, Macbeth. Got a good long part here.
I but died an hour, but this chance I had lived a blessed time
Yes.
from this instant. There's nothing serious in immortality. All the bill toys were known to and graces that the wine of life is drawn and the mirror lease is
Lees.
lease
Lees.
is left in the vault to drag off.
Right, so the wine of life is drawn, the good, vibrant, liquid wine, the lees, just kind of the dregs, what's left is gone. So we're the dregs, we're left behind, but the wine of life, the king, is gone. When it says there's nothing serious in mortality, what does that mean? I mean, what is mortality?
Mortality is, I guess, life or living, or so that's,
Immortality. So if immortality is living forever, mortality must mean,
Living for living.
no, mortality means death.
Oh.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It says there's nothing serious.
So we're
in-
mortals? Are we dead?
We are mortals because we will die. That's a good question. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, in fact, there's an expression that says, I'm a mere mortal. That just means, I'm no God here. I will eventually die, you know. I'm a mere mortal, don't expect, you know. So that's a good question. Okay. Enter Malcolm and Donalbain. Now these are the two sons of Duncan who's been killed. And Donalbain says, what is amiss? And Macbeth replies to him.
You are and do not know to know it,
Mm-hmm.
the spring, the head of the fountain of your blood. It stopped, the very source of it stopped.
Yeah, so he's having to report
What happened? The murder.
to their dad. And Macduff says, your royal father's murdered. And Malcolm says, oh, by whom? And Lennox, this other nobleman, says, those of his chamber, as it seemed, had done it. Their hands and faces were all badged with blood. So were their daggers, which unwiped we found upon their pillows. They stared and were distracted. No man's life was to be trusted. With them, who's he talking about?
The guards.
That's right. So it looks, for now anyway, like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth may have pulled this off, and everybody thinks that the guards have done it. We'll see if that story holds. Macbeth says, oh yeah,
Oh yeah, I do
repent.
Repent me of my fury, that I did kill them.
Now, isn't that interesting? So Macbeth reported he killed who?
He killed the guards because he didn't want them to talk.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You're ahead of my question, because he did not want them to talk. He thought, well, you know, what if they wake up and somehow they understood what was going on and they spilled the whole thing? Because he's feeling pretty guilty. So, but if you think about it, not necessarily a good idea. There's just going to be a lot of blood to flow. So in addition to the king having been knocked off, he's trying to make things better, and as he goes on, the blood that he causes, we'll see if it really makes things better. So Macduff says, wherefore did you do so? Wherefore in Shakespeare means why. You know, when in Romeo and Juliet, there's a famous line, wherefore art thou Romeo, right? And it really means why are you here, not where are you. So why, wherefore means why. Oh, you've got a nice long part, Zary. Go ahead. Who can be wise?
Who can be wise and make tempered and furious, loyal and neutral in a moment? No man. The expedition.
Slow down just a little bit. I love the fact that you can read it so fluently, but folks need to hear. So the expedition.
Okay. The expedition of my violet love, outrun and Pauser. Reason.
Yeah.
Here lay Duncan, his silver skin looked laced with his golden blood, and
Good.
his gashed stabs looked like a breach in nature.
Good.
For ruin's wasteful entrance, there's a murderer's.
There, the murderers.
Steeped in the colors of their trade, their daggers unmannerly breached with gore. Who could refrain?
Refrain, which in this case means, who could keep from doing this? I'm looking at my king. He's dead. I see, what he says, are the guys who did it, right? He says, oh, I couldn't help myself. Emotions just took over. Right. Okay. Yeah.
That had a heart to love, and in the heart courage makes love known.
Right. So who could have kept himself from killing these two guys who had knocked off our king? I want to point out something here. Going to go to the board just another moment here. What do you notice, Eric, about this spelling? How do we spell this in the United States?
There's no U.
Right. British spelling oftentimes has additional letters like that, and for words like that, it often does. It's more conservative in terms of making changes in the language. So that's something that we're going to observe as time goes on. When we read British literature, sometimes the spellings are substantially different from the way we spell them. Have you noticed that kind of thing before?
Well, the thing with other languages like French and Spanish, it's kind of funny because like all they basically did was they got a little lazy and just took out or added a few letters and called it a language.
That's a good point. In terms of reading Spanish and other what are called Romance languages, and by the way, when we talk about Romance languages, what word do you notice in Romance?
Romance?
What's the...
Oh, Roman?
Yeah, Roman. So what that's saying is that in Rome, of course, ancient Rome, the language was Latin. And so when we say the Romance languages, we're talking about those languages that are closely tied to Latin, that sort of came out of Latin. and is tied to that. So Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and French are all considered Romance languages. So when I said that, that's what I meant. So, but you're right, in Romance languages, in Spanish especially, it's very regular. So when you see something, it's very easy to pronounce it, right? Not necessarily to accumulate the vocabulary, but to pronounce it, it's not too hard. Would you agree? Whereas in English, we got all kinds of things like PHs that are supposed to be Fs, and GHs that are supposed to be Fs, and silent letters. And I would imagine that for someone like your mom, who is trying to get better with her English, that can present kind of a problem in terms of,
Yeah.
you know, spelling.
Yeah.
And you've known other people like that.
Yeah.
By the way, Zarek's roots are to Mexico. That's where his mom's from. And were you born in Mexico, actually? No, you were.
I stayed there as a child for 1 year, like really young.
That's what and then didn't you even go to school in Mexico for 1 year?
I believe I was 8 or 7 when I stayed there for like a year, and like I stayed there.
Right.
And it got like really tough when I got back because like all the sounds got like the pronunciation was different.
Right.
Like when I was whenever I would study and I would see the I,
Right.
I would try to use it like if it was in Spanish it was an E.
Mhm.
So it was good.
Actually, you probably don't even remember this, but actually you were recommended to the program originally because you were struggling a little bit in school for the reasons that you're talking about. Was that year back when you came into the program in 2nd grade, was that your first full year back in the United States, or had you had 1 full year before that? Do you remember?
I believe I had one full year before that.
Before that, okay. But you were still trying to get your footing. So the ascent, academic ascent that this young man has made is very impressive because he was struggling after a year spent in Mexico to get his skills fully where they needed to be. And then he, at a certain point, 3rd, 4th, certainly by 5th grade, began to take off. And in fact, reading is a real strength at this point. Along about the 5th, 6th, 7th grade, you were really struggling to get all of the math skills that you needed to get, and we worked a long time on multiplication tables and all that, but now doing very well in math in school also. So I'm very proud of the academic ascent, and that's another one of my communications too, though. We can't be thinking that people from immigrant situations cannot rise to high levels of accomplishment, because as Eric shows you, they certainly can. I have totally lost my place. Can you help me? Let's see. All right, so after Macbeth goes through all that about, oh, how could I keep from killing the guards when they took away my wonderful king, Lady Macbeth says, help me, hence, oh, like she's about to faint. And Macduff says, look to the lady, and Malcolm says, why don't you read Donalbain's part? So Malcolm and Donalbain are the sons of King Duncan. And Malcolm, in an aside to his brother, says, his younger brother says, why do we hold our tongues, that most may claim this argument for ours? Aside to Malcolm, Donalbain says,
What should be spoken here, where your fate? He hid in
Augur hole.
May rush and seize us. Let's away, our tears are not yet brewed.
Now he's saying, let's away. Our tears are not yet brewed. Our tears are not flowing too fully yet. We're young in this grief, but we need to get out of here. Why do you think they might feel that they need to get out of here?
Because they didn't want to hear it, or they didn't want to be murdered.
Yeah, I think both of those are true. It's pretty hard to take, but I think especially the latter, the last thing you said, they're wondering if they might be next because, after all, they're next in line, and if they suspect that somebody knocked their dad off because had ambitions, well, maybe they would be next. Very good. Okay. Then Banquo, who is the good friend of Macbeth, who also had some favorable predictions from the witches, says, look to the lady. I guess she's gone through the whole thing. Who knows? Maybe she did faint because it is pretty tense, right? Lady Macbeth is carried out, and Banquo says, and when we have our naked frailties hid, that suffers in exposure, let us meet and question this most bloody piece of work to know it further. He's speaking to his fellow noblemen here, Lennox and Macduff, so we need to talk this over. Now, that's kind of an interesting expression from Banquo, right? I think he means that in a way. Let's get together and figure out what's happened. But of course, he's also had his suspicions. It's complex because he wanted some of those things to come through from the witch's prophecy also, right?
Wait, sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay.
But did Vanko cooperate with the murder in any way?
Well, that's a good question, and that's what I'm really addressing right now. There was a point at which, a while back, when Banquo seemed to say, well, Macbeth, you do what you need to do, like he understood what might happen. But leave me out of it, right? Leave me innocent.
Well, and he said that he will help him, but if he gets caught, he will not get blamed for it.
Right.
Yeah.
So he kind of wants it both ways.
He wants to help, but then he doesn't want to.
So I don't think he's too torn up that the king is dead, and yet he knows it's a dastardly deed, that the aristocrats, the noblemen, should discuss together to figure out what their next step should be, and yet he's kind of been almost partially in on it. So you've probably known that situation in people where there are a lot of complex things going on at one time, trying to have it a lot of different ways. So it's a very interesting part. That suffer in exposure, let us meet and question this most bloody piece of work to know it further. Fears and scruples shake us. In the great hand of God I stand, and thence against the undivulged pretense I fight of treasonous malice. So he's acting like he suspects that something terrible's been done, and he knows it's most likely that, well, he knows something terrible's been done, and I think he pretty well knows who. So then Macduff says, and so do I, and they all say together, so all, and then Macbeth says, no, that's okay. Let's briefly.
Let's briefly put on manly readiness,
Readiness.
and meet I the hall together.
Right. And then they all say, well contented, which means, yep, that's a pretty good plan. We'll meet later and talk things over. So even Macbeth is saying, because, right, he's trying to play the innocent nobleman, the aristocrat who cares so much for his king, he's going to join the discussion too. And they're all going to try to figure out what should be done about this dastardly deed, including Macbeth. Okay, so exeunt, which always means they all exit together, all but Malcolm and Donalbain. So once again, the princes, the sons of the king, murdered king, are talking. Malcolm says, what will you do? Let's not consort with them. Let's not go off with them and talk. To show an unfelt sorrow is an office which the false man does easy. They suspect that some in their number are not too torn up about the murder of the king. He says it's easy for them to go off and act like they're all sad. We're really sad. We need to separate ourselves and do something else. I'll to England, right? So he's headed to England. Now Donalbain says what?
To Ireland, we're parted.
Separated.
Oh,
Our
our separated fortune shall keep us both the safer. Where we are there, daggers, men's smiles, near in blood, nearly bloody.
Yeah, lots of lines in Shakespeare are famous, and the one about there's daggers in men's smiles. So in other words, they're smiling, but underneath there's a lot of danger, right? So Malcolm's going to England, and Donalbain's going where? Yeah. So I'm going to go to the map here just a moment. So as Eric, look around here. So we start out with a problem of the way our teachers are trained, as I've said, in a way no fault of their own, because this is the system that is training them. So teachers who are going to teach in our K through 5 schools get very weak training. They're not really people of knowledge. There are people who we would hope want to serve young people, and they get some kind of feel for that in their college training, and they get some teaching experience, some student teaching experience. But if you go into a K through 5 classroom and you're looking for a lot of knowledge being transmitted, you're just not going to find it as a rule, by tradition. So then we get into the school district itself. We have teachers come into the system itself, and they're plugging into a system that furthermore does not reward them for really being at the top of their profession. They may, as individuals, decide that they want to do that, but they're paid according to how many years they put in the system, and then whether or not they get an advanced degree or not. And as I've explained before, the kinds of advanced degrees, so-called advanced, are not very advanced because they are master's degrees, but they're masters of teaching English or teaching math. They're not good, solid programs in learning more mathematics, a lot more mathematics, or a lot more history, or a lot more English. So that's the way they are remunerated. Number of years put into the system, whether they get a watered-down master's degree. So we have a problem in terms of who we have in our classroom. I have a conviction that many of those people actually are quite smart, they're quite capable, they can be retrained, but they're going to have to be retrained. And one of the things that I have decided, we could spend a lot of time trying to overhaul department schools and colleges of education, but that will be quite a task. So while we're working on that one, my conviction is that we should really do that at the school district level. This is something else that's very important for people to understand. If you go to Japan or Singapore or Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, France, Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, you're going to find an approach to education that is at the national level. So curriculum is basically set at the national level, standards for teachers are set at the national level, and that is disseminated throughout the nation so that there is a degree of consistency and equity in the way that people are educated. That's the approach. In the United States, we have a certain number of laws that are passed at the national level that have to do with special education funding, scholarships, various kinds of funding and policies that come out of the national level, but we leave it up to state and local districts to administer those. So we believe in what we say is local control. Kick it down from the national level to the state level. Again, there is a certain amount of policy, a certain amount of legislation that comes out of the state capitol. But again, that has to be implemented at the local level in local centralized school districts, which is where we really think, where we say the decision-making should be. Because there tends to be a certain resentment that abides at the central, even at the central school district level, when we have federal mandates or state mandates, and there tends to be a lot of resistance even to laws that go officially into effect. An example of that is No Child Left Behind, which was an effort actually to have accountability in our school systems and to put the finger on those schools that had failed our students year after year after year. Schools like Nellie Stone Johnson, Lucy Laney, Bethune, and so forth here in Minneapolis. But of course, that puts the spotlight on those schools that had not done a very good job, and by implication, teachers who had not done a very good job. So there's a lot of pushback against that. Well, here we have these mandates, here we have these standardized tests, and we're supposed to administer those. People telling us what to do, just let our do our job. Well, the whole point is that you have not been doing your job. My point here is, and I will at some point go into the history of No Child Left Behind, its promise and how it got undermined by both Republicans and Democrats. But what I really want to say here is that because we believe, we say we do so strongly, in local control, that's where meaningful change is going to have to be. One of the differences, as I have explained before, that I have with other people in the change movement is I'm not a big proponent of charter schools. That has been a way to try to offer an education to kids who have not gotten it, to turn decision-making over to parents and maybe teachers who have decided they want to start a school, but many of these people have not done a very good job running schools. Many of them have crashed, many of them have had shady financing and all of this stuff. And as I've explained before too, with both that and the voucher system, which a lot of conservative Republican types want to privatize everything, turn that over to private schools and give kids vouchers at least up to a certain point where they can go to private schools. Well, to me, that is an abdication of responsibility. It's a turning away of responsibility from the central school districts where the bulk of our students, for any foreseeable future that we can imagine, are going to be educated. So my energy is not into making it easier for people to start charter schools, certainly not to work toward a privatization, voucherized system, but to focus on the central school district. I strongly suspect that one of the reasons people don't do that, that's not the focus of their effort, is it's very difficult. Because the bureaucracy is deep. There are way too many people employed, for example, by the Minneapolis public schools. It's over-bureaucratized. There are too many meaningless positions, too many people staring at computers. If you go in there, you know, so much money is wasted in an overly bureaucratized system. So it's far from perfect, which is the point, but that's what we have to spend our energy overhauling. So I, on the one hand, believe fervently in the notion of strong centralized school districts, but I also have a firm grip on the fact that they're just not doing the job. And so we have to take the responsibility to make those centralized school districts better. So I think that if in the United States we say we want local control and we want excellent teachers in the classroom, then we are going to have to take that responsibility to the centralized school district. So we have teachers who are trained to teach K through 5. We have teachers who supposedly come out of college preparatory programs ready to teach in the middle school and high school, but too oftentimes they have not received the training that they should have, and they haven't been educated to the level that they should have. So at the central school district, we should begin to retrain teachers. We should bring in college professors, people with knowledge, and we should teach those K through 5 teachers history, good, solid grounding in world and American history. We should teach them a great deal about biology and chemistry and physics so that they have the vision on that. And they believe that they can do it, so they can believe that their students can do it. Fine arts, give them a broad education in music and art, painting, sculpture, so that they have a feel for that part of the wonderful thing, the wonderful gift that is existence. So then they know about these things and they can be excited, and that excitement then is transmitted to their students. Literature. If you take the core knowledge books that I've held up and demonstrated before by E.D. Hirsch, there are great selections from Mark Twain, from Maya Angelou, from Toni Morrison, from Langston Hughes, from Ernest Hemingway, you know, Shakespeare. So we're talking about a curriculum that goes up through the 6th grade. He starts now, E.D. Hirsch and his editorial board starts down as early as preschool and gives these kids a different subject matter each year, but consistent within the realm of American history, doesn't repeat some things, reviews some things, but keeps the whole thing moving forward so that by the time you got out of the 6th grade in the core knowledge series that really takes elementary school education seriously, the embarrassing thing would be is that those 6th graders under such a system and those students who spend their time in core knowledge schools have a better education than many of our students who claim a diploma, and many of the adults who we have walking around in our society, some of them in very, very responsible positions. So if we were to take that responsibility, bring in qualified people, professors and other people who really know the subject area, then we could give our K through 5 teachers the education that they need in the natural sciences, history, the fine arts, the literary arts, and mathematics. That last one, let me just say, at least briefly, there's a great deal of math anxiety and math fear among K through 5 teachers. And that's one of the reasons that our math instruction tends to be so lousy at the K through 5 level. They haven't been encouraged to take challenging mathematics courses themselves. They probably don't even remember algebra and geometry very confidently, much less trigonometry, statistics, and calculus. So if you have people who themselves are kind of shaky and don't believe they can do it, then they don't have the vision that their students can do it. And that's the kind of person who we need in our K through 5 classrooms. If